In March 2020, 26-year-old Jessica Kim vanished without a trace while reviewing an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland, leaving behind her camera equipment, a half-written blog post, and 50,000 followers who immediately knew something was wrong. The popular food blogger had built her reputation on authentic, detailed reviews of farm-to-table establishments, and her sudden disappearance during what should have been a routine dinner review sent shockwaves through the culinary community. But 2 years later, when investigators thought the case had gone cold, a shocking confession would reveal the dark truth behind Jessica's disappearance, and what they discovered would expose a web of deception that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins on a rainy Tuesday evening in March 2020, when the world was just beginning to understand the scope of the pandemic that would reshape everything. Jessica Kim had spent the afternoon preparing for what she believed would be another successful review, carefully researching Farm and Table, the acclaimed restaurant that had opened just 18 months earlier to considerable fanfare in Portland's Pearl District. The establishment had quickly gained recognition for its commitment to locally sourced, organic ingredients, and its partnership with small farms throughout the Willamette Valley. Jessica's routine was meticulous, developed over 3 years of building her food blog, Authentic Eats, into one of the Pacific Northwest's most trusted culinary voices. She would arrive at restaurants with her professional camera equipment, a notebook filled with research questions about sourcing and preparation methods, and an encyclopedic knowledge of local farming practices that allowed her to spot inconsistencies others might miss. Her reviews weren't just about taste. They were investigations into the stories restaurants told about their food, and her followers trusted her to separate authentic farm-to-table establishments from those merely capitalizing on trendy marketing terms. On the morning of March 17, 2020, Jessica had posted her usual pre-review update to her Instagram story, showing her camera bag packed and ready, with the caption, "Excited to explore Farm and Table tonight. Their partnership with Sunset Valley Farms has me intrigued." The post generated immediate engagement from her followers, who had come to anticipate her thorough investigations into restaurant claims about ingredient sourcing. Jessica had built her reputation on asking the hard questions that other reviewers avoided, and her audience knew that a positive review from Authentic Eats meant a restaurant had truly earned its farm-to-table credentials. Farm and Table had reached out to Jessica 3 weeks earlier through her business email, inviting her for a complimentary tasting menu with the promise of meeting with head chef Roberto Valdez to discuss their sourcing philosophy. The restaurant was facing the early challenges of pandemic restrictions, and management was eager to maintain their reputation for quality during a time when many establishments were cutting corners to survive. The invitation email, sent by General Manager Patricia Chun, emphasized the restaurant's commitment to transparency and their willingness to provide documentation of their farm partnerships for Jessica's review. Jessica had spent considerable time researching the restaurant before her visit. She had contacted Sunset Valley Farms directly to verify their partnership with Farm and Table, reviewed the restaurant's permits and certifications, and studied their menu for seasonal consistency that would indicate genuine local sourcing. Her research had revealed some minor inconsistencies in their online claims about organic certification timing, but nothing that raised serious red flags. The restaurant's social media presence showed regular posts featuring their partnerships with local farms, complete with photos of Chef Roberto Valdez visiting supplier locations and selecting ingredients personally. The afternoon of March 17th, Jessica had spent 2 hours at her apartment in Southeast Portland, preparing her equipment and reviewing her notes. Her neighbor, Sarah Martinez, would later tell investigators that Jessica had seemed excited but focused, mentioning that she was particularly interested in Farm and Table's claims about their dry-aged beef program and their relationship with heritage breed suppliers. Jessica had expressed some skepticism about restaurants' ability to maintain premium sourcing during the economic uncertainty of early pandemic restrictions, but she appeared optimistic about finding another authentic establishment to recommend. To her followers, at 4:30 p.m., Jessica loaded her Honda Civic with her camera bag, notebook, and a small digital recorder she used for interviews with restaurant staff. Her standard practice was to document not just the food, but the entire experience of dining at establishments that claimed farm-to-table credentials. She would photograph ingredient deliveries if possible, interview servers about sourcing knowledge, and request to meet with chefs to discuss their supplier relationships in detail. This thorough approach had earned her the respect of both readers and restaurant industry professionals, who knew that earning a positive review from Jessica Kim meant their operation could withstand serious scrutiny. Jessica arrived at Farmand Table at 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before her scheduled 6 p.m. reservation. The restaurant occupied a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls, Edison bulb fixtures, and rustic wooden tables that created the aesthetic customers expected from farm-to-table establishments. The hostess, later identified as college student Emma Rodriguez, remembered Jessica arriving with her camera bag and being seated at a corner table that provided good lighting for photography. Emma would tell investigators that Jessica had seemed professional and friendly, asking about the restaurant's busiest times and whether Chef Roberto would be available for a brief interview after her meal. The dinner service began normally, with Jessica following her usual routine of photographing each course and taking detailed notes about preparation methods, seasoning, and presentation. Server Michael Thompson, a culinary school graduate who had been working at Farm and Table since its opening, served Jessica throughout the evening and later provided investigators with detailed recollections of her questions and observations. Michael remembered that Jessica had asked specifically about the provenance of the heritage pork belly appetizer, inquiring about which farm had supplied the meat and how long the restaurant had been working with that particular supplier. According to Michael's statement, Jessica's questions became increasingly specific as the meal progressed. She inquired about the organic certification dates for various vegetables, asked to see documentation of the restaurant's relationship with Sunset Valley Farms, and requested information about the dry aging process for the beef she had ordered as her main course. Michael would later admit to investigators that some of Jessica's questions had made him uncomfortable, not because they were inappropriate, but because he realized he didn't have complete answers about the restaurant's sourcing. Claims that he had been repeating to customers for months, at approximately 7:30 p.m. Jessica requested to speak with Chef Roberto Valdez, explaining that she was working on a comprehensive review and wanted to include direct quotes about the restaurant's sourcing philosophy. Michael went to the kitchen to make the request, and Roberto agreed to meet with Jessica after the dinner rush subsided. The kitchen was busy despite pandemic restrictions, serving a modified menu to a reduced-capacity dining room, and Roberto was dealing with the additional stress of managing food costs while maintaining the quality standards that had earned the restaurant its reputation. While waiting for her interview with the chef, Jessica continued photographing her meal and taking notes. Other diners in the restaurant that evening would later tell investigators that nothing seemed unusual about Jessica's behavior or appearance. She appeared focused on her work, but not agitated or concerned. She had ordered a glass of wine with dinner but appeared completely sober and alert throughout the evening. Her table was positioned near the kitchen entrance, giving her a partial view of food preparation and service, which was typical for her restaurant reviews. At 8:15 p.m., Roberto Valdez emerged from the kitchen to speak with Jessica. The chef, a 38-year-old culinary school graduate who had worked at several high-end establishments before opening Farm and Table, appeared confident and professional as he approached Jessica's table. Restaurant security cameras would later show Roberto sitting down across from Jessica, and witnesses observed them engaged in what appeared to be a friendly conversation for approximately 10 minutes. However, no recording devices captured their actual dialogue, leaving investigators to piece together the content of their discussion from witness observations and Roberto's eventual confession. Several diners noticed that the conversation between Jessica and Roberto appeared to become more intense as it progressed. Maria Santos, seated at a nearby table with her husband, would later tell investigators that she observed Jessica showing Roberto something on her camera or phone screen, and that the chef's demeanor seemed to change dramatically during this portion of their interaction. Roberto appeared to lean forward, speaking in lower tones, while Jessica maintained her professional composure but seemed to be asking pointed questions. The conversation ended abruptly when Roberto stood up from the table, according to multiple witness accounts. Michael Thompson, who had been observing from the service station, noticed that Roberto appeared visibly shaken as he returned to the kitchen. Jessica remained at her table for several more minutes, continuing to write notes and review photos on her camera. She appeared calm and methodical, showing no signs of distress or conflict, despite whatever had transpired during her conversation with the chef. At 8:45 p.m., Jessica requested her check and gathered her belongings to leave. She left a standard tip and thanked the staff for their hospitality, behavior that seemed entirely normal to everyone who interacted with her. Emma Rodriguez, the hostess, walked Jessica to the door and mentioned that she looked forward to reading the review. Jessica's response, according to Emma, was that she had a lot to think about, but that she had gathered very interesting information during her visit. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Jessica Kim alive that Jessica's Honda Civic was found the following morning in the restaurant's employee parking area behind the building, a location that wasn't visible from the street and wasn't regularly monitored by security cameras. The car was unlocked, with Jessica's purse inside, but her camera equipment and notebook missing. The keys weren't in the vehicle, and investigators never located them. The position of the car, parked in a space typically used by kitchen staff, struck investigators as unusual, since customers generally parked in the main lot adjacent to the restaurant's front entrance. The initial missing person investigation, led by Detective Raymond Martinez of the Portland Police Bureau, focused on the possibility that Jessica had left voluntarily due to pandemic-related stress. The timing of her disappearance, coinciding with widespread business closures and social uncertainty, led investigators to consider that she might have decided to take a break from her blog and public life. Jessica's bank accounts remained untouched, but investigators noted that she had some savings and could theoretically survive for several months without accessing her accounts. Jessica's family immediately disputed the voluntary disappearance theory. Her parents, David and Linda Kim, flew to Portland from their home in Sacramento within 24 hours of learning about Jessica's disappearance. They emphasized to investigators that Jessica was passionate about her work, had been discussing plans for expanding her blog into video content, and had never shown signs of wanting to disappear from her life. Her younger brother, James, provided investigators with detailed information about Jessica's mental state and recent communications, all of which suggested someone fully engaged with her life and work. The investigation revealed that Jessica had been maintaining regular contact with family and friends in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had posted consistently on social media, responded to business emails, and had scheduled interviews with other restaurants for the following week. Her laptop, found in her apartment, contained draft blog posts and research for upcoming reviews, suggesting someone actively planning for the future rather than preparing to disappear. Detective Martinez interviewed all restaurant employees present on the evening of March 17th, beginning with the staff who had directly interacted with Jessica. The interviews revealed a consistent timeline of events, but provided no clear explanation for Jessica's disappearance. All employees claimed ignorance of any problems or conflicts during Jessica's visit, and most described her as professional and pleasant throughout the evening. However, investigators noted some inconsistencies in staff accounts of the conversation between Jessica and Chef Roberto, with witnesses providing varying descriptions of the tone and duration of their interaction. Roberto Valdez initially told investigators that his conversation with Jessica had been routine, focusing on the restaurant's sourcing philosophy and his background in farm-to-table cuisine. He claimed that Jessica had asked standard questions about supplier relationships and preparation methods, and that their discussion had ended cordially. Roberto appeared cooperative during his initial interview, providing investigators with contact information for farm and table suppliers and expressing concern about Jessica's disappearance. He suggested that Jessica might have left the restaurant and encountered problems in the parking area, but claimed no knowledge of what might have happened to her. The investigation expanded to include Jessica's digital footprint and communication patterns. Investigators analyzed her social media accounts, email correspondence, and blog analytics to identify any potential threats or conflicts that might have motivated someone to harm her. Jessica's online presence revealed someone who occasionally received criticism from restaurant owners unhappy with negative reviews, but investigators found no evidence of serious threats or ongoing conflicts that would suggest a motive for violence. That Jessica's phone was never recovered, Despite extensive searches of the area surrounding farm and table and analysis of cell tower data to track her movements on the evening of her disappearance. The last ping from her device occurred at 9:17 p.m. on March 17th, approximately 32 minutes after she had left the restaurant, according to witness statements. The location data placed her phone somewhere within a 3-block radius of farm and table, but the signal was lost after that point, suggesting the device had been turned off or destroyed as weeks passed without any trace of Jessica. The investigation expanded to include surrounding counties and neighboring states. Missing person bulletins were distributed throughout the Pacific Northwest, and investigators coordinated with federal authorities to monitor border crossings and transportation hubs. Jessica's photo was featured in local media coverage, and her social media followers organized search efforts and awareness campaigns. Despite these extensive efforts, no credible sightings or evidence of Jessica's whereabouts emerged. The COVID-19 pandemic significantly complicated the investigation, as businesses closed and reopened under changing restrictions, making it difficult to maintain consistent access to potential witnesses and evidence. Several businesses near farm and table closed permanently during this period, taking with them security camera footage and employee witnesses who might have observed Jessica's movements. After leaving the restaurant, the changing landscape of the downtown area also made physical searches more challenging, as construction projects and vacant buildings created new places where evidence might be hidden or lost. 3 months after Jessica's disappearance, Detective Martinez expanded the investigation to include a deeper examination of farm and table's business practices and financial situation. The restaurant was struggling to maintain operations under pandemic restrictions, and investigators discovered that several of their supplier relationships had been terminated due to unpaid invoices. This financial stress raised questions about whether the restaurant might have been cutting corners on ingredient quality to reduce costs, potentially creating a motive for silencing a reviewer who had discovered such practices. The financial investigation revealed that farm and table owed significant money to several local farms, including Sunset Valley Farms, their supposed primary supplier for organic vegetables and heritage breed meats. Account records showed that the restaurant's orders from verified organic suppliers had decreased dramatically in the months leading up to Jessica's disappearance, while their purchases from conventional food distributors had increased. This pattern suggested potential fraud in their farm-to-table claims, exactly the type of deception that Jessica's thorough investigation methods would have been likely to uncover. Investigators interviewed representatives from multiple farms that had been listed as farm and table suppliers on the restaurant's website and marketing materials. Several farm owners reported that their relationships with the restaurant had been misrepresented online, with some claiming they had never supplied ingredients to farm and table despite being listed as current partners. Others confirmed that their business relationships had ended months earlier due to payment disputes, yet their farms continued to be featured in the restaurant's promotional materials as active suppliers. Tom Richardson, owner of Sunset Valley Farms, provided investigators with detailed records of his business relationship with Farm and Table. The farm had initially supplied the restaurant with organic vegetables and heritage breed pork during their first year of operation, but the relationship had soured due to late payments and disputes over product quality standards. Richardson's records showed that Sunset Valley Farms had terminated their supplier agreement with Farm and Table in January 2020, 2 months before Jessica's disappearance. Yet the restaurant continued to claim an active partnership with the farm. In their marketing materials, this discovery prompted investigators to examine other aspects of Farm and Table's operation more closely. An inspection of the restaurant's food storage areas, conducted with health department officials, revealed several concerning practices that contradicted their claims about ingredient quality and sourcing. Investigators found evidence that the restaurant was repackaging conventional meat as grass-fed and organic, relabeling expired products with new dates, and using cheaper ingredients while charging premium prices for supposedly farm-fresh meals. The health department investigation also uncovered issues with the restaurant's record-keeping and certification documentation. Several organic certification documents appeared to have been altered or falsified, and the restaurant couldn't provide adequate proof of their relationships with the farms they claimed as suppliers. These discoveries suggested a systematic pattern of fraud designed to deceive customers who were paying premium prices for authentic farm-to-table dining experiences. As the investigation into farm and tables business practices deepened, a clearer picture emerged of the financial and operational pressures facing the restaurant in early 2020. The combination of existing debt, pandemic-related revenue losses, and the cost of maintaining genuine farm-to-table sourcing had created an unsustainable situation. Investigators theorized that the restaurant had begun cutting corners on ingredient quality while maintaining their premium pricing and marketing claims, creating exactly the type of fraud that Jessica Kim's investigative approach would have exposed. Detective Martinez interviewed additional restaurant employees who had not been present on the evening of Jessica's disappearance, but who had knowledge of the restaurant's sourcing practices. Several former employees, speaking confidentially, confirmed that they had observed questionable practices, including the repackaging of conventional ingredients as organic, the use of cheaper substitute ingredients in signature dishes, and the falsification of supplier documentation for health department inspections. Maria Gonzalez, a former prep cook who had left Farm and Table in February 2020, told investigators that she had witnessed Roberto Valdez instructing kitchen staff to remove organic labels from conventional meat packages and replace them with fake organic certification stickers. Gonzalez claimed that this practice had become routine during her final months at the restaurant, and that several staff members had expressed discomfort with deceiving customers about ingredient quality. Her testimony provided crucial evidence that the fraud at Farm and Table was systematic and ongoing at the time of Jessica's disappearance. The investigation also revealed that Roberto Valdez had been under significant personal and professional pressure in the months leading up to Jessica's disappearance. Financial records showed that he had invested his personal savings into the restaurant and had personally guaranteed several business loans that were approaching default. His professional reputation was tied directly to Farm and Table success, and the exposure of fraud would have resulted in the end of his culinary career and significant financial ruin. Investigators discovered that Roberto had been researching Jessica's background and review methods in the weeks before her scheduled visit to the restaurant. His internet search history, obtained through a warrant, showed that he had read multiple articles about food bloggers exposing restaurant fraud, studied Jessica's previous reviews that had resulted in health department investigations, and searched for information about the legal consequences of food service fraud. This research suggested that Roberto was aware of the risks Jessica's investigation posed to his business and reputation. The timeline of events on March 17th became clearer as investigators pieced together additional evidence from security cameras in the surrounding area. While Farm and Table's internal cameras had allegedly malfunctioned on the evening of Jessica's disappearance, cameras from nearby businesses captured partial views of the restaurant's parking areas and loading dock. Analysis of this footage revealed vehicle movements that didn't match the accounts provided by restaurant staff, suggesting that someone had been moving cars and equipment during the hours after Jessica's departure. One particularly significant piece of evidence came from a traffic camera located 3 blocks from Farm and Table. The camera had captured images of Jessica's Honda Civic being driven away from the restaurant at 11:43 p.m. on March 17th, approximately 2.5 hours after. Witnesses claimed Jessica had left the building. The driver wasn't clearly visible in the footage, but the timing contradicted the restaurant staff's claims about when Jessica had departed and suggested that someone had moved her car to its final location hours after her disappearance. As the first anniversary of Jessica's disappearance approached, Detective Martinez faced pressure from department supervisors to either develop new leads or transition the case to cold case status. The investigation had consumed significant resources without producing an arrest or recovery of Jessica's remains, and other cases were demanding attention. However, the detective remained convinced that Farm and Table held the key to understanding Jessica's fate, and he continued pursuing leads related to the restaurant's fraudulent practices. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through a separate investigation into food service violations during the pandemic. Health department officials were conducting routine inspections of restaurants that had remained open during lockdown periods, and Farm and Table was scheduled for a comprehensive review of their operations and safety protocols. The inspection, conducted in February 2022, revealed additional violations and inconsistencies that prompted investigators to take a closer look at the restaurant's entire operation. During the health department inspection, officials discovered that farm and table's walk-in freezer system had been completely replaced in April 2020, just 1 month after Jessica's disappearance. The restaurant claimed that the old freezers had failed due to power outages during the early pandemic period, but investigators found no records of power outages in the area during that time. The timing of the equipment replacement, combined with the suspicious circumstances surrounding Jessica's disappearance, prompted Detective Martinez to obtain a warrant to examine the restaurant's equipment purchase and installation records. The freezer replacement records revealed several inconsistencies that raised investigators' suspicions. The old freezer units had been disposed of through a scrap metal company rather than being donated or resold, which was unusual for equipment that was supposedly only 18 months old. The installation company had been paid in cash rather than through normal business channels, and the old units had been removed and disposed of within 48 hours of the replacement order, suggesting unusual urgency in completing the work. Roberto Valdez's personal financial records showed a cash withdrawal of $15,000 just days before the freezer replacement, money that wasn't accounted for in the restaurant's official equipment purchase documentation. This cash transaction, combined with the timing and circumstances of the equipment replacement, created a pattern that investigators found highly suspicious. The possibility that Jessica's remains had been concealed in the restaurant's freezer system before being disposed of during the equipment replacement became a central focus of the investigation. AS investigators prepared to confront Roberto with this new evidence. The restaurant's financial situation continued to deteriorate. Farm and Table was facing bankruptcy proceedings, and several former employees had come forward with additional information about fraudulent practices and suspicious activities during the period of Jessica's disappearance. The mounting pressure from multiple investigations, combined with the restaurant's impending closure, created conditions that investigators hoped would finally lead to answers about Jessica's fate. The health department's findings also revealed that Farm and Table had been operating with expired permits and falsified inspection records for several months. The restaurant's organic certification had been revoked due to documented violations, yet they continued to advertise organic ingredients to customers. The systematic nature of the fraud provided investigators with leverage to pressure Roberto for information about Jessica's disappearance. As the evidence of deliberate deception supported theories about motive for harming a reviewer who had threatened to expose these practices, Detective Martinez scheduled a formal interview with Roberto Valdez for March 15, 2022, 2 days before the second anniversary of Jessica's disappearance. The timing was intentional, designed to maximize psychological pressure by confronting Roberto with evidence of fraud during the emotionally significant period surrounding the anniversary of Jessica's disappearance. The detective had spent months building a comprehensive case file that documented the restaurant's fraudulent practices, the suspicious circumstances of Jessica's disappearance, and the evidence suggesting her remains had been concealed and disposed of through the freezer replacement operation. The interview was conducted at the Portland Police Bureau's Central Precinct, with Roberto accompanied by his attorney, David Walsh, a criminal defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime cases. Roberto appeared nervous and exhausted, showing the effects of 2 years of investigation and the stress of his failing business. Detective Martinez began the interview by reviewing the timeline of March 17, 2020, asking Roberto to provide detailed accounts of his interactions with Jessica and his activities throughout the evening. Initially, Roberto maintained his previous statements about the evening of Jessica's disappearance, claiming that his conversation with her had been routine and professional. However, when Detective Martinez presented evidence of the restaurant's fraudulent practices and the timeline of the freezer replacement, Roberto's composure began to deteriorate. The detective methodically laid out evidence showing that Jessica would have discovered the fraud during her investigation and that Roberto had both motive and opportunity to prevent her from exposing the restaurant's deceptive practices. The confrontation intensified when Detective Martinez revealed that investigators had identified the specific evidence Jessica had likely discovered during her review. Security footage from a neighboring business had captured Jessica photographing delivery trucks outside Farm and Table's loading dock before her scheduled dinner reservation. The trucks belonged to conventional food distributors rather than the organic farms the restaurant claimed as suppliers, providing Jessica with photographic evidence of the fraud that contradicted the restaurant's marketing claims. Detective Martinez explained to Roberto that investigators believed Jessica had documented evidence of the fraudulent sourcing practices and had confronted him with this evidence during their conversation on the evening of March 17th. The detective suggested that Roberto had realized Jessica's review would expose the systematic fraud and destroy both the restaurant and his personal reputation, creating a motive for preventing her from publishing her findings. As the interview progressed, Roberto's attorney attempted to limit his client's responses and suggested taking breaks to confer privately. However, Roberto appeared increasingly agitated and began providing more detailed accounts of his conversation with Jessica. He admitted that she had asked pointed questions about supplier relationships and had shown him photographs that appeared to document discrepancies between the restaurant's claims and their actual practices. The turning point came when Detective Martinez presented Roberto with evidence that his personal cell phone had been active in the area where Jessica's car was eventually found, during the time period when security cameras had captured the vehicle being moved. This evidence directly contradicted Roberto's claims about his whereabouts after Jessica's departure from the restaurant and suggested his involvement in moving her car to conceal evidence of her disappearance. Faced with mounting evidence of his involvement and the realization that investigators had built a comprehensive case against him, Roberto requested a private consultation with his attorney. The interview was suspended for 30 minutes while Roberto and his lawyer discussed their options. When they returned, Roberto's demeanor had changed completely, and he appeared resigned to the inevitable consequences of his actions. Detective Martinez resumed the interview by asking Roberto directly about Jessica's fate and the location of her remains. The detective emphasized that Jessica's family deserved to know what had happened to their daughter and that cooperation in recovering her body would be considered favorably in any potential plea negotiations. The emotional appeal, combined with the overwhelming evidence of Roberto's involvement, finally broke through his remaining resistance to telling the truth. What happened next would finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted Jessica's family and followers for 2 years, revealing the dark truth behind her disappearance and the lengths someone would go to protect a web of lies built on defrauding customers who trusted them to provide authentic, quality food. Roberto Valdez took a deep breath, looked directly at Detective Martinez, and began to confess to the shocking crime that had ended Jessica Kim's life over her commitment to exposing the truth about farm-to-table fraud. She had photographed everything, Roberto said, his voice barely audible in the interview room. The delivery trucks, the repackaging operation, even some of our falsified certification documents that were visible in the kitchen prep area. When she showed me the photos during our conversation, I realized she had enough evidence to destroy everything I had worked for. She wasn't just going to write a bad review. She was going to expose systematic fraud that would have resulted in criminal charges and the end of my career. Roberto continued, explaining that Jessica had confronted him directly about the fraudulent practices, showing him photographic evidence that proved Farm and Table was deceiving customers about ingredient sources and quality. She had documented the conventional meat delivery from industrial suppliers, photographed repackaging operations where staff removed organic labels and replaced them with fake certifications, and captured images of expired products being relabeled with new dates. She told me she was going to publish everything, Roberto said, his composure completely breaking down. She said customers had a right to know they were being charged premium prices for conventional ingredients, and that she couldn't be complicit in the fraud by remaining silent. I begged her to give me time to correct the problems, to make changes before she published anything, but she said the systematic nature of the fraud meant there was no way to fix it quietly. Detective Martinez asked Roberto to explain exactly what had happened after Jessica left the restaurant. Roberto described following Jessica to the parking area behind the building, where he made one final desperate attempt to convince her not to publish her findings. When Jessica refused to compromise and began walking toward her car, Roberto said he panicked and struck her with a piece of equipment from the kitchen loading dock. I didn't plan to hurt her, Roberto claimed, though investigators would later question this account given the premeditated nature of his actions. But when I realized she was going to ruin everything, I just snapped. She fell and hit her head, and when I checked on her, she wasn't breathing. I knew my life was over, but I also knew I had to try to cover it up or I would lose everything. Immediately, Roberto confessed that he had moved Jessica's body into the restaurant through the rear service entrance, using a delivery cart to transport her to the walk-in freezer area where she wouldn't be discovered. He then returned to the parking area and moved her car to make it appear that she had left the restaurant safely. Over the following weeks, as the investigation into Jessica's disappearance intensified, Roberto realized he needed to permanently dispose of the evidence. The freezer replacement was planned from the beginning, Roberto admitted. I knew investigators would eventually search the restaurant, and I needed to make sure there was no physical evidence of what had happened. I used the pandemic equipment failures as an excuse to replace the entire freezer system and had Jessica's body removed with the old equipment when it was scrapped. The confession provided investigators with the closure they had been seeking. For 2 years, though it also revealed the calculated nature of Roberto's actions in covering up the crime. His decision to dispose of Jessica's remains through the equipment replacement operation showed planning and premeditation that contradicted his claims of acting in panic or self-defense. Detective Martinez asked Roberto about Jessica's camera, equipment, and notebook, which had never been recovered. Roberto admitted that he had destroyed these items immediately after the incident, burning them in the restaurant's dumpster area to eliminate the photographic evidence of farm and tables. Fraudulent practices. The destruction of this evidence had also eliminated Jessica's documentation of other restaurants' practices, depriving the culinary community of her final investigations. The interview concluded with Roberto providing investigators with details about the disposal of Jessica's remains and the specific scrap metal company that had handled the freezer equipment removal. While he couldn't provide exact locations where her body might be recovered, his confession gave Jessica's family the answers they had been desperately seeking about their daughter's fate. Roberto Valdez was immediately arrested and charged with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and multiple counts of fraud related to his restaurant's deceptive practices. The confession provided prosecutors with the foundation for a strong case, though the destruction of physical evidence and the disposal of Jessica's remains through the equipment replacement operation meant that some aspects of the crime would never be fully resolved. The news of Roberto's confession sent shockwaves through Portland's restaurant community and the broader food blogging world. Jessica's followers, who had maintained hope for her safe return throughout the 2-year investigation, were devastated to learn that she had been killed for doing the work they had trusted and supported. The revelation that a restaurant owner had murdered a reviewer for exposing fraud highlighted the potential dangers faced by food writers who took their investigative responsibilities seriously. Jessica's family released a statement, expressing their gratitude to Detective Martinez and the Portland Police Bureau for their persistent investigation, while also acknowledging their heartbreak at finally learning the truth about their daughter's fate. David and Linda Kim established the Jessica Kim Foundation for Food Safety and Transparency, dedicated to supporting investigative food journalism and protecting reviewers who expose fraud in the restaurant industry. The case also prompted changes in how food bloggers and reviewers approach their safety when investigating potentially fraudulent establishments. Several prominent food writers began working with security consultants and implementing safety protocols for reviews that might expose criminal behavior. The tragedy of Jessica's murder served as a stark reminder that the pursuit of truth in food journalism could sometimes carry serious personal risks. Farm and Table closed permanently following Roberto's arrest, and the building was eventually converted into a community garden dedicated to Jessica's memory. The Oregon Department of Agriculture implemented new oversight procedures for restaurants claiming organic and farm-to-table credentials, inspired by the systematic fraud that had cost Jessica her life. Roberto Valdez ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. During his sentencing hearing, he expressed remorse for his actions and acknowledged that Jessica had been doing important work in exposing fraud that was harming both consumers and legitimate farm-to-table restaurants. However, his expressions of regret could never undo the devastating impact of his decision to prioritize his business interests over human life. The resolution of Jessica Kim's case provided closure for her family and followers, though it also highlighted the ongoing challenges of maintaining integrity in the food service industry. Jessica's commitment to authentic reporting and her willingness to ask difficult questions had ultimately cost her life, but her work continued to influence food journalism and consumer protection efforts long after her tragic death. Detective Martinez, reflecting on the case years later, emphasized that Jessica's murder represented more than just a business dispute turned violent. It highlighted the importance of investigative journalism in protecting consumers and the need for society to support and protect those who take on the difficult work of exposing fraud and holding businesses accountable for their claims. The legacy of Jessica Kim's life and death continues to inspire food writers and consumer advocates who understand that the pursuit of truth sometimes requires courage and carries risks. Her story serves as both a tribute to the importance of authentic food journalism and a sobering reminder of the potential consequences when business interests prioritize profit over honesty, and when the fear of exposure drives people to unthinkable acts of violence.